He had every right to be resentful. His family's ministry had sacked him. He had been watched. A man wearing a bulletproof vest had given him a letter of termination. His own mother's funeral slideshow had been altered to hide his face. Then, a few hours after discovering what his mother had said as she was dying, he took a seat and penned the most kind statement in the entire narrative. And I want to read it to you in its entirety. The post that put an end to it all. When Jonathan Lamb released his statement, it didn't sound like it was written by a man who had been waiting for confirmation. It didn't sound like someone was taking advantage of institutional leverage. It read like someone who had just learned something that made him open in a way that called for candor rather than cunning. And who, instead of responding from behind any sort of protective stance, decided to do it from that cracked open spot. This was written by him. And since it conveys everything, it should be read in its entirety without interruption. It is comforting and profoundly reassuring to discover that my mother's final request was for me to take on leadership roles at Daystar. One of the worst times in my life was when we were estranged from one another. And it gives me a sense of serenity that I didn't anticipate experiencing so quickly, knowing that her heart moved toward healing in her last days. Her request is in line with what my father told the board and our family in his own succession plan. In their last days, both of my parents pointed in the same direction. Above all, it is a calling that God gave me as a young child. It was never about title or ambition. It is about staying true to a calling that my parents identified and that I have never abandoned, even in the most trying circumstances. Families suffer. Relationships grow tense. However, God is vast, and His grace surpasses everything. In addition to honoring my parents, I want to see Daystar thrive for future generations and pursue peace wherever it is feasible. I hope the board will respect my mother's and my father's prior requests. Daystar has never been owned by a single individual. God owns it, and they made great sacrifices to further their purpose. I have faith that the board will give great thought to my parents' legacy and the future they want to ensure. I'm still prepared to help. Go back and read that slowly. Because there isn't a single line about winning in there. There isn't a single gloating sentence. There isn't even a single sentence that suggests he was correct and she wasn't, even though he was, and anyone reading the past several years' history would have every right to say so. There was no debate in what he wrote. It served as a testimonial. It's also one of the most responsible and sophisticated public declarations to come out of this whole story. What those words really mean. The specifics within that statement are more important than the overall impression it conveys, so let's carefully examine it. Jonathan describes two distinct things in two words when he states that his mother's final desire is both profound and healing. Healing, since one of the worst types of human suffering is being cut off from your mother. And in spite of everything else, knowing that she turned to restoration in her last days is a kind of grace that truly heals. Verifying, as what Joni said was not a novel concept she came up with toward the end of her life. It was an acknowledgement of something that had always been true. Jonathan had tried to cling to something he knew was true despite every institutional assault on him. He draws a line in the sand concerning his identity and motivations when he claims that this was never about ambition or title. He is not claiming Daystar as a reward for putting up with hardship. He's talking about a calling. Something that was handed to him as a child, acknowledged by his parents, validated by his father's succession plan, and now by his mother's final request, and never given up even when he had every emotional and practical reason to do so. There is no such faithfulness. It builds up over time and manifests itself in situations just like this one. He claims that Daystar has never been owned by a single individual. God owns it. The institutional logic that has controlled that network in the years since Marcus's death is being subtly but clearly corrected by him. The argument was that since Joni was the president and co-founder, her personal choices could not be held accountable. However, because the person with the highest authority in the building desired it that way, Jonathan might be fired, monitored, and ostracized. He's not claiming that about himself. He is focusing on the mission. And that distinction is quite important. And I'm still prepared to serve when he says simply, the weight of everything he has experienced is contained in just 4 words. I don't demand my proper position. I won't return what was taken from me. All set to serve. That is the words of a person who has truly considered this before God and emerged from it without resentment. The follow-up that reveals his true nature. Jonathan made a strong remark regarding the succession. In some respects, however, the follow-up that he and Susie jointly released is even more illuminating, because it tackles the aspect of the circumstance that is most difficult to handle with integrity, and does it without hesitation. We expressed a willingness to pursue peace, forgiveness, and healing within the family in recent conversations regarding reconciliation, they wrote. In order to have that talk, we were unwilling to withdraw anything about our child or make admissions that we don't think are accurate. These two things are quite different. Our child is heard, supported, and shielded. Any inquiries about any criminal activity should be sent to the proper authorities. Not while negotiating with family members. We think it is possible to pursue peace without compromising one's core beliefs. We think it is feasible to seek forgiveness while letting the legal and investigative procedures proceed as they should. We have never denied the existence of hurt feelings on all sides. We are still prepared to forgive, seek healing, and work toward reconciliation whenever we can. We still pray for justice, truth, healing, and peace for all those concerned. This is a declaration from those who realize that forgiveness and accountability are not mutually exclusive, something that many institutions and many individuals within those institutions have never been able to accept. That you can sincerely wish someone to be at peace while maintaining that they must face consequences for their actions. Reconciliation does not imply denying the injury. No matter how much institutional pressure is used, a family's recovery and a child's safety cannot be traded against one another in a negotiation. In exchange for being welcomed back into the family, Jonathan and Susie seem to have been implicitly asked to retract their story of what happened to their daughter or acknowledge actions they do not believe to be true. This is precisely the type of transactional peace that appears to be reconciliation but is not. Before being allowed to grieve with those who have harmed them, victims of abuse do not need to make a false confession in order for there to be true reconciliation. That was clearly stated by Jonathan and Susie, and they did so without getting upset, making accusations, or shutting any doors. The difference between Joni's and the board's comments is obvious, and needs to be identified. Previously, Lamb worked with the board to ensure an executive leadership team was in place so that the ministry would continue uninterrupted. According to Daystar's official board statement following the announcement of Joni Lamb's passing on May 7, 2026, numerous media outlets, including CBS News Texas, Charisma News, and the Fort Worth Report, reported the comment. It was Daystar's official institutional voice discussing the arrangements Joni had made before to her passing. A group of executive leaders. The language is that. A group. Not a name. Not an individual. Not a precise succession plan. A group. After that, Jonathan revealed his mother's really final request. For me to take up leadership again at Daystar. There is a difference between the two items. They're not even pointing in the same direction. The board statement is purposefully and artfully ambiguous. Business terminology that fosters institutional adaptability. Almost anything may be inferred from that. This appears to commemorate the individual being remembered while maintaining flexibility. Rachel may be in charge if an executive leadership team is in place. It can indicate a committee is in charge. It might entail a mix of current staff leads with no Lamb family member holding a prominent role. It might be built so that Jonathan doesn't even need to ask for his return. Tom Callender communicated Joni's final request to Sally, who subsequently communicated it to Jonathan and Susie. It contained a name. It was accompanied by a condition, reconciliation, and a result. Daystar, give him back. The board's official public statement makes no mention of any of that specificity. The board said, Team. Jonathan, Joni said. It's not an accident that there is a gap. In the context of a contested succession, ambiguous institutional terminology is never accidental. It's a decision. Additionally, the board will eventually have to publicly explain its decision to depict Joni's funeral arrangements in a way that neither names Jonathan nor respects the particular wish she allegedly made. What the board owes, what Marcus constructed, and what Joni verified. Jonathan's remark has a line that strikes at the heart of everything. In their last days, both of my parents pointed in the same direction, he says. According to Marcus Lamb's written succession plan, Jonathan would be in charge of the ministry that he and Joni had established together. That was neither unclear nor informal. Both the board and the family were informed. Marcus desired it. After Marcus passed away, Doug Weiss took over, and the person Marcus had chosen was demoted, monitored, put on a performance improvement plan, and ultimately fired by a bulletproof vest-wearing guard. In her final moments, Joni reportedly stated, "This is not what I want," after taking in what had transpired. Jonathan is the one I selected, or more accurately, the one Marcus selected, and the one my heart is now affirming. Return what was rightfully his. In the end, both parents gave the same instruction and response. That recorded reality is currently in the hands of the Daystar Television Network board. According to reports, Tom Callender heard it directly from Joni. Tom Callender told Sally, a family friend, in his own words and while crying. Jonathan gracefully and non-demandingly made his response public. There is documentation. There is reporting. By using ambiguous language instead of naming succession, the board's own statement shows that they are aware of the pressure this causes yet are unwilling to find an honest solution. Clarity is what the board owes to the memory of Marcus Lamb, Joni Lamb's final request, Jonathan Lamb's 40 years of preparation and loyalty, and the millions of people who have donated to this ministry. It's not a team, it's not a moniker, and it's not institutional terminology meant to preserve the status quo. A transparent, public, and documented respect for the requests made by both founders. The last act of affection from a mother. Joni Lamb herself deserves to be seen clearly in this moment, thus there is one more thing worth mentioning about her. She was not a flawless lady. The record of her final years reveals a person who committed a grave mistake, surrounded herself with voices that supported rather than refuted that mistake, used institutional power to silence those closest to her, and permitted real harm to build up within a ministry founded on the declaration of truth. That's all recorded. It's all real. However, according to the tale that has been made public and verified by numerous loved ones, Joni Lamb was also a lady who did the right thing in her final days. Perhaps for the first time in a number of years, she saw the issue clearly. She witnessed the price of being married to Doug Weiss. She witnessed the consequences of her choices for both her son and the organization her husband had dedicated his life to creating. She also made progress toward rehabilitation during her remaining period. What had been done could not be undone. She was unable to make up for the years that Jonathan had lost, the broken relationship, the program partners who had left, or the lost credibility. However, she gestured toward the path to recovery. She said a name. "Give him back, Daystar," she urged. And that is a last act of love from a mother to a boy she has deeply injured in a way that is both inadequate and somehow lovely. That's exactly what Jonathan got. Not as a trophy, not as confirmation, but as a sense of tranquility he had not anticipated experiencing so quickly. When grace is genuine and not an act, it appears like that. Grace that is able to accept an inadequate act of love without listing all of its predecessors. Grace capable of saying, "I am aware of what you did. I accept this gift even though I am aware of its cost." The question is the board's.